everyone. Those of you who are in attendance, if you would, please check your cell phones to make sure that you have placed it on silent or vibrate. And for those participating remotely, we welcome you. I do not believe that we have the microphones active this evening, but if so, if you would, please make sure that you have muted your microphone throughout tonight's event. This evening, we're going to be hearing a presentation from the administration as well as our consultants regarding the comprehensive plan. So without any further ado, I will turn the floor over to Ken Prince.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the council. Can everybody hear me okay? Is the mic working good? Okay. First thing I would like to do is have introductions because we have a lot of people. And I guess I won't go through everyone, but those that are speaking, we'll have them talk as they come up. But this is an informational meeting that very specifically includes, obviously, the Common Council. Also, the Mishawaka, the Planning Commission was invited to the meeting. We also have representatives from the administration that are in attendance also here this evening. So as background to tonight's meeting, we've gone through this a number of times. The last time we did not complete the process, but we started the process was in 2004, 2005. We started a list of questions. We started going down that and determined that it wasn't appropriate to move forward at that point in time with doing a whole comprehensive plan amendment, but we did get some good feedback at that time, which means that our last valid comprehensive plans for the city were accomplished in 1992, 1999, and 2003. Back in 1992, the Mishawaka 2000 plan, Chris Huff prepared primarily as an annexation document for the Brownberry-Catalpa area. You're welcome, Ron. Also, in 1999, I played an integral role and with the Troyer Group preparing the River Center Master Plan. And then DLZ, with both the county and the city, prepared the Capitol Avenue Land Use Plan that was adopted in 2003. Those are the three active comprehensive planning documents for the city that exist right now. So as you can see, all of them being multiple decades old, and I've been asked numerous times to amend that it's a process that we should undertake, we should definitely do. And my comment has always been that it should be something that we undertake with an intent, because honestly, we've done very well, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm biased, but with planning over the last few decades, that really it's about the information, the common mission moving forward, analyzing it property by property. But there is value of putting all of what we have continued to do on paper. And the other element that is incredibly important, I think, is what questions do we have as a city that we feel we should dig down deeper, provide information, and then change our goals, objectives, our policies based on the information that we have. So what we're going to be talking about tonight is really exactly that. This is the kickoff. Anybody here that was expecting to be presented with a plan, that this is the opposite of that. This is the kickoff of defining what do we want our plan to look like, what is required by law, and then at the end of the day, what information, what other questions, what feedback do we want from our elected and appointed officials to formulate that plan. So with that, we'll move on to the presentation. As I indicated, we have our three existing plans, and then I'd like to refer to Chris Godlewski? Yes. Godlewski. I always say Godlowski, so I always get it wrong. Good Polish pronunciation. So Chris prepared the slides associated with state law, and I'll defer to him right now to present how state law outlines what a comprehensive plan is and what we have the ability to do.
Hi there, Chris Godlewski. I'm a senior urban planner with Avonmarsh. I'm accompanied by Crystal Welch, who is also a planner at Avonmarsh. She heads the planning division. And Daryl Knipp is our CEO president from Avonmarsh as well. So as Ken said, starting off on an approach like this is really understanding the principles. You know, you probably haven't gone through the legislative process or the introductory process of the planning process. So this is the bare bones, the starting point to kind of understand how it all works. And it's laid out really nicely in the state law, as you see the citation up there. It It's Indiana Code 3674-500. There's about 15 chapters in the planning law in Chapter 4, and 500 is the comprehensive planning section. Yeah, this basically just establishes that the Plan Commission is authorized to create the comprehensive planning process. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's the city council who approves it, but the planning and staff and the Plan Commission, the people geared towards the land use component of the city code, that's where it all starts. Real straightforward and simple. Even though this is not in the 500 series, this is something very important to know, that in Indiana specifically, you cannot have a zoning ordinance without the establishment of a comprehensive plan. It's very simple. They go hand in hand with each other. The zoning ordinance reflects the goals and the policies of the land use plan. So when you look at the second section, 603, anytime there's a rezoning that happens, that's the criteria that the staff provides in a staff report to that zoning map change that ultimately the city council approves. So those are the 5 criteria, statutory criteria, every jurisdiction in the state of Indiana considers for a zone map change. So that's the most intense type of change you could do, and that's why it's done by the council. When you have like a special use with the BZA, that's one use on one piece of property with limitations. But when you're changing something from business to industrial, you're changing it for eternity, basically. So that's why you need, that's why this section refers to the comprehensive plan. What's the overarching policy that the city had made historically to make that decision? So this is, again, Indiana, I think, for the most part, keeps it simple. When they organize what a comprehensive plan is, the only mandatory 3 criteria are what's spelled out there. I won't read that for you. You can tell it's pretty straightforward. That could be, every community views how to respond to that differently. That could be very lengthy. That could be short. That could be in the form of written documents. It could be a form of maps. It could be a variety of things that come out to somehow stating what these 3 points are. And I would say if there's any time you have questions along the way, if I'm going through something too quick, just don't hesitate to ask. I think this is, I understand this, and I hopefully you do as well, but I don't want to skip over if you don't understand something. That seems straightforward so far?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I don't expect you to read that all either, but look at number 2, there's 23 items in there. So you have the 3 mandatory things you have to do to meet the criteria in order to pass this resolution, the comprehensive plan. These are all additional ones. It just gives you a background of what you could do. They're not mandatory. For instance, if a community wanted to focus on local mass transit, number L, you could authorize that section and develop that topic further and make it part of your overall comprehensive plan, if that's something your community want to research and look into further. V, for example, conservation of energy, water, soil, and agricultural and mineral resources. Maybe if you're in an agricultural area and there's a lot of mining, you might want to look at that provision and research that further and come up with some policies on how you determine land use. So these are good things to explore. I would spend some time just looking through all of these. These are the options that you can have. Some communities do, and some communities don't, as we'll see. Yep.
So just very briefly, as Chris indicated, the planned content, when you look at the 3 elements that are required, you could potentially do that in a page, right? Like it is nothing, so essentially our comprehensive plan, it's not about length, it is about addressing these 3 points, and the reason I highlighted the very last letter W is the fact that it identifies any other factors that are part of the physical, economic, or social situation within the jurisdiction. Thus, we can put anything we want in our comprehensive plan. We have to address those 3 points, and these are all suggestions. So in terms of having a legally binding plan, there are many ways to address it across the board, so we just wanted to highlight that. The other thing I wanted to state is, while we have him, we have Mayor Wood in the audience. I know I should have identified him earlier, but I didn't, so I apologize, Mayor. Also, our city planner, Derek Spears, and our senior planner, Christopher Hill, is also here. So I don't expect any of those to come up, but the mayor, if he'd like to, by all means, can come up and say a few words. So, but anyway, we'll move forward on the presentation. Mayor, is there anything you wanted to say? No. Good. So, go ahead, Chris.
Just to give you a good example, you're going to look at a comprehensive plan later today as an example, but when you exercise all those topics, you could have a plan. I know Michigan City has a plan that's 600 pages long, or you could have a plan that's 6 pages long. So it just depends on what you're looking for and how you grow. Same thing, it's just a continuation of options you could do that's authorized by the state law. You could read that verbatim. It's pretty straightforward. You could see when you go through these, there's going to be a lot of infrastructure related type things as part of the planning process. Again, this is nothing more than just stating what's possible, that you're going to consider other plans when you look at your adopting a new plan. As Ken mentioned, there was 2 plans before. There was the Capitol Avenue plan and there was the Riverfront plan, and you can incorporate those plans into the new adopted plan, or as time goes on, if there's a new study area and there's a new district plan, something like that maybe we would have done in the past, you can incorporate those into your plans because they still have value and direction on how you grow. 505, just perfunctory, just requesting information so you could develop your comprehensive plan further from other agencies, could be utilities, local utilities, electric, gas, because those are all things that help drive development where you can grow. Thoroughfare plan, I know Crystal and I were just talking about this earlier. I think in most communities in Indiana, this is, you could also call it a capital improvements plans for your right-of-ways. This is something I think exists mostly with highway departments, but it is an option that you could put in your comprehensive plan. For instance, if you had one and you classified your roads, you could have a land use plan to how you develop off certain types of roads, limited access, certain types of businesses, and things like that. So 7, 8, I think 9 and 10, and maybe 11. I won't go through these. These are just the statutory process of how you go through the hearing process. There's a certain type of notice you do. It's very unique compared to rezonings or BZA hearings. There's certifying the plan after the Planning Commission adopts it to the legislative body. Just very specific approach, nothing complicated. Legislative approval.
Can I stop you there? And perhaps you're going to get into it now, so I'll defer for a moment while you touch on this section.
Okay. Legislative approval, what happens if there's like an amendment? If there's a substantive amendment, it goes back to the Plan Commission, that goes back to the council. What happens if it's rejected, which hopefully that doesn't happen because you would think Plan Commission and council are all on board through this process, but it still authorizes the approach on how to do it.
In just,
Yep.
this is undoubtedly a series of points that only a lawyer will care about.
Yeah.
And probably are more academic than anything else, but as I read the statute in section 509, this is a unique creature under Indiana law in so much as it indicates that the resolution only requires a majority vote, which is our standard process, with few exceptions, and it's not subject to any approval or veto by the chief executive, which surprises me. That's the first time I ever remember reading that in Indiana law. But then when we get to the nuts and the bolts of the legislative approval, it appears to me that the legislative body, for our purposes, this council, has the ability to be able to accept, reject, or amend.
Yes.
If we propose an amendment, it goes back to the Plan Commission for Plan Commission consideration. Then, if the Plan Commission agrees with us, then the amendment we
Yes.
propose stands. If the Plan Commission does not agree with us, then we have to pass another resolution approving our amendment that we originally proposed.
And they have to have a hearing as well to hear their changes. So it's really substance of changes. If it's grammar, that's not a big deal, but if it's content, then that's how the process would work.
And again, none of that is to indicate that I think that we can and should
Yeah.
have to follow through that process,
Right.
but it's more of an academic question than anything else.
Exercise, yep. Good point, though. Wrong way here. And the staff would be accountable to make sure it goes through the process correctly. Yep, just more procedural stuff. I don't know if you have any comments on that, but that's 5 chapters worth of how to go through the process.
I do have a question, Chris.
Yes,
Are we going to get a copy of this summary sent to us?
I was thinking the same thing. Okay, perfect.
It's hard to read from here.
Yep. And these are just highlights, as Ken said, it's a kickoff, to get you thinking, getting the questions later. Did you want to take this part? Okay. Do you have any questions on the basic level content or the approach, the process, what you're obligated to do or not to do?
Doesn't appear so. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So this is where, lawyers aside, where we move from the boring to getting to the more interesting and the meat of the, but you have to go through that to understand that it is a unique process. And it's very important that it's a joint process, not just a singular entity that is looking at this document. And so what was interesting when we hired Abin Marsh to help us guide through this process for the comprehensive plan, one of the examples they brought that I thought was really interesting that you've been copied with, so one of the handouts that were in the back of the room was the Elkhart County Comprehensive Plan document. And as Chris mentioned, this is 6 pages long. I think ours is going to be a little longer than that, just knowing me, and I'm a little verbose on occasion. But I think the guiding principle of it, and I use our River Center Master Plan as an example, is the River Center Master Plan is in the 40-page area. And overall, that plan, when we completed it and we've been following it, everybody remembers mixed use, architecturally significant, pedestrian friendly. Those are words that carry through, and everybody understands that concept. And my hope is, as we go through this process, that we will have a document that is not 600 pages long, that the general public can review, that everybody can gravitate toward certain phrases, issues, policies, direction on a very easy basis when you're evaluating projects to move forward. That, again, very much like the downtown, is it mixed use, architecturally significant, pedestrian friendly? Those are very easy to evaluate things on. Obviously, when you look at the whole city, it'll be more complicated than that. But that's the general goal that we have. So that's been copied for your use. I'm not saying that we should copy the policies that Elkhart County has, but merely the format I thought was a good one and relevant. One of the things I felt bad about was when Mayor Lickey left the city of South Bend, one of his accomplishments. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars completing this giant novel of a comprehensive plan. And then when Mayor Buttigieg, for good or bad, came in and went in an entirely different direction. So my hope is that we have a document that can be followed and can be amended as we move forward, and that it won't gather dust onto the count in my office. The other thing I would say is that, as Chris mentioned when we were talking about what is required or what could go in the comprehensive plan, keep in mind with the tax abatement and TIF, you already know that we have a comprehensive plan. We have a list of projects. We already identified how they're funded. Each utility already has a master plan. Chris Jammers, our city engineer, working with MACOG, has a transportation plan that is updated and implemented. So we already have all these components together. And what this plan is really meant to do, which is different than that, is to guide future development and to guide policy decisions outside of those separate documents. We use those documents as factors in making decisions, but this document is looked at as differently. So to do that, what we did was we broke it into areas for goals and policies. So the first being sidewalks and trails, and we did that because we want to start you off easy. So that's why we started with sidewalks and trails. Transportation planning, annexation and city growth, environmental sustainability, housing and neighborhoods, aesthetic gateway, sense of place issues, economic development, and then downtown Mishawaka is how we have it broken up. There's nothing magical about these categories. We can mix and match. We can call them something else. But the reality is we just can't have something called comprehensive plan and expect people to follow it. So we had to break it into components, and that's what we've done for the moment. So, and this will become more evident when we start moving forward, but as I mentioned, the sole purpose of tonight is to figure out what we want and the questions that we want to ask so we can dig deeper and provide information for our public appointed and elected officials to basically provide that guidance that we need to draft the policies and goals and objectives of the city. The first part of that will be GIS and mapping as an example. So when we wanted to explain to the public and to the council specifically of what we're doing, this is the example that we've used. So the first thing that we're going to show you is we've mapped all our residential properties in the city based on ownership. So to do this, we have to figure out how do we do this with a computer and not go through thousands and thousands of parcels at a time. And the way that we had to do this was looking at homestead exemption. So if you have a homestead exemption in the city, that's how we've based ownership. It does not mean that we've identified every property correctly, because we have not. Some people haven't claimed the exemption, so they would not fall into that category. Some people, it just hasn't gone through yet in terms of registering the exemption. So keep in mind that these are very broad brush images that you're seeing here. The next thing that we did was, well, we know that neighborhood issues continue to be at the forefront. We talk about these at neighborhood meetings. We talk about them at our neighborhood improvement team meetings. And so what we did in working with code enforcement is we said, how do we best identify where these properties are occurring? And what Joe Van Evel indicated was that the best way to do that would be where the attorney has identified a public nuisance property where they have drafted a letter, because there we had a specific address so we could map all the addresses that were associated with it. So we went back 5 years, identified every property that the attorney had written a public nuisance letter on, and then we also pulled every property in the last 5 years that was on the agenda of the neighborhood improvement team meeting. So if you look at a hierarchy, the public nuisance is where many departments were involved. It could have involved police. The neighborhood improvement team routinely talks about properties where there's issues, whether there's issues there at the moment or not. And you'll see as an example on here, Rose Park is identified as an area on the map. And it's only because of issues that were happening at the park, meaning we wanted to follow up on it, which is why it's now color-coded on the map as a neighborhood improvement team issue. And then what we did, because GIS is fun, and forgive me, I'm very much like an attorney has issues, I guess planners have issues too, but we overlaid the property ownership along with the public nuisance and the neighborhood improvement team issues. So basically what we could do is then identify in the areas that are nuisances, are they coming from rental properties, or are they coming from homeowner occupied properties? So what we're going to show you now is just those maps, and you've been given a copy, and we put them up here. And the bad thing about looking at the entire city at once is that they're very hard to read. So let's get into this. So this is our residential properties based on ownership. The darker color is homeowner occupied properties, properties that are claiming the exemption. The purple properties, and it's difficult to see in the neighborhoods, but it's really mixed. The purple properties are the rental properties, and then the yellow properties fall in the other category. So they could be commercial properties, they could be industrial properties, they could be park properties, they fall in the other category. is identified in yellow. So in more detail, I picked the area that was bordered by Ironwood, going to Logan, to the river, and south to the city limits, to give you an idea, a more blow-up area of what that looks like. So that speckled colors that you get going through the neighborhood shows that speckling of rental properties versus home ownership properties and how that relates to this area on the west side of the city. So again, this is just information. It doesn't mean anything at this point. That's just how we plotted it. So when we looked at plotting the nuisance and neighborhood improvement team properties, again, it's difficult to see at this level, but there's a star located where the nuisance properties are, and the neighborhood improvement team properties are colored in that kind of reddish color on the city. So this is the second map that was produced by Abmarsh. And again, really good information to have, and this is that same area of what it looks like blown up. So if you look at that area, you see the few neighborhood improvement team properties, and over the past 5 years, we had 15 different nuisance properties where the attorney wrote letter. We did not dig into details regarding what the issue was. We just identified that these, we're trying to establish information and trends that we could potentially look at if we want to look at a policy, a goal, a change in a code or an ordinance. We want to provide this base level of information for the council and the planning commission to make decisions off of. So again, I'm not saying that this means anything. I think what, if anything, it means is we know all this, right? We live and breathe and work the city every day, and we know that we have rental property, we know we have nuisance issues, and now we see that they're mapped. And now we move on to how does that look like relative to home ownership versus owner occupied. And again, this is the whole city showing that information, and then looking at that same neighborhood, it shows that all but one of those nuisance properties were rental properties and not owner occupied. The other thing that's interesting is the neighborhood improvement team properties. There's quite a few of those that are owner occupied properties associated with it. Again, I'm not making any conclusions here. I'm just identifying that this is the information that we're mapping in order to provide information to the Planning Commission and Council should you want to dig deeper into this issue. And as the mayor mentioned in the State of the City, one of the issues that we want to dig into is rental housing in the city and how that impacts. So we've prepared this information, and the reason why we prepared this information is we want the council and the Planning Commission to think about what other information you would like to see that we can spend our time mapping and providing real data, real information, not a guess, regarding what the issues are going on in the city that we would like to address. Kate.
And this is great beginning of information, but I would argue that there are lots of properties that may not have been identified as a nuisance property, meaning that they never got a letter, but are still properties that have been consistently problematic over time. So my comment is that I think there's probably more problems than you have identified here.
Right, so the two pieces of information that we have, it's not just the nuisance property, but you see the highlighted properties that are either owner occupied. If they made the neighborhood improvement team list, they made it here. And part of it was, our problem was we didn't want to map every the grass case in the city, if you will, and try to figure out how to make a semblance of that.
So I would ask then maybe that that we look at the criteria for the neighborhood improvement team. What makes that neighborhood improvement team list? Is it there's a police call and there's a code enforcement, and it's kind of what the equation is.
So there is, and that's part of our problem with mapping this information, and we had that discussion with codes specifically. How do we best do that? Because we can't, every citation issue, and I had discussions with Joe Van Evel on this as well, doesn't mean there's necessarily a problem there, right? When it makes the neighborhood improvement team list, that typically represents that we have a problem that we want to address. And when it raises to a nuisance level, that means we have a significant problem that we need to address. So that's why we chose to map what we did. And the other challenge, Kate, and we're open to suggestions, so anything But if you think about what you said regarding the other properties that aren't identified by this list, and I agree that there are, our question is, how do we figure out how to map them? And what do we want to do with that information is the other component of that. So even if we map that information, what would it tell you if there were a half dozen more color-coded properties in here?
It probably wouldn't tell us, I don't know that it would make a difference in terms of the direction. I mean, clearly, these problems are scattered in a pretty specific area of the old housing stock of the city. So it's Woody's
And I used
district,
one
my
neighborhood because I
district,
couldn't go
your
through.
district.
Yeah, so I used one neighborhood because I couldn't go through all of them.
Exactly.
But in the older areas of the city, this is uniform. This is
Right.
not just the West End.
I
could've-
agree.
okay,
I'm looking
right,
at my
right.
district. You
Correct.
know, it's the same thing.
Right.
So I'm really pleased that you're bringing this up because this was the first thing little note that I made to myself. I'm just happy to see that we have neighborhoods because I guarantee you that any citizen living in these areas is going to be interested in what are we going to do about rental properties? How are we going to improve? And the other thing that I notice here is that I often hear that it's not the rental properties, that it's the owner-occupied properties, but what this is showing us is that it is indeed the rental properties. The majority of it is rental properties. There are homeowner-occupied properties that have problems, but the majority is rental. So to me, that is an area, and we've talked about it for a number of years now, but that's an area that I think we need to really focus on and, find models in other communities, what's working, and build it into the plan. So I appreciate the information here.
And if I can piggyback, I agree with much of what you said, but I'm not ready to agree with that last conclusion because it depends on which category that you're looking at. As Ken indicated, if you look at the neighborhood improvement team, that shows a different set of data points than does the nuisance letters. So I'm not prepared to say that it's purely a rental property. There are trends here that match up with rental properties, but I think beyond that, and that's the discussion that I would suspect that we'll have moving forward. The other thing that I would suggest, and this is very impressive, and I like the data aligned to the map, but I'd be interested in things such as, if we can pull it from the system without it being time-consuming, with regard to code enforcement citations, what are the top 10 categories over the 5-year interval? That doesn't necessarily need to be aligned to the map if it doesn't line up that concretely and distinctly, but that would be interesting to me, coupled with what are, same type of analysis, but with regard to those cases that have actually gone to court enforcement hearing and appeared before the officer.
And thank you, Mr. President, because I didn't mention it earlier, but I want you all to know that you are being assigned homework at the end of this. And part of that homework is identifying exactly those points. And Crystal's in the back taking notes, so I'm sure she got the note
Okay,
that you
thank you.
just said. But we don't want to figure it all out tonight, right?
Yes.
We definitely want you to think about this and to think about what you want to see so that we can figure out the information that we can provide to better inform the decision.
Perfect, thank
So
you.
this is go ahead, man.
Quick question regarding the mapping of the owner-occupied versus the rentals and non-residential. Would you say, based on those results, it remains consistent, about 50% rental versus owner-occupied throughout the
One of
city?
the things, in the city, just by census data, we are almost perfectly even at 50% rental, 50% homeowner occupied. But keep in mind, that also includes the large apartment complexes.
Sure.
So when you look at neighborhoods like this, and I can go back. In neighborhoods, there is more owner occupied than there is rentals. You can just see it from the color.
Right.
But that, I couldn't tell you, Matt, if that's 2/3
Okay.
or what that number is, and it's really broken down by area, and it's even different block by block.
Sure.
Going through the city. But the overall number for the city is 50% rental, 50% owner occupied, and so it's a little more when you exclude those large apartment complexes in terms of the larger percentage is going to be homeowner occupied.
All right, thank you.
I was going to say, this data is initial, and it hasn't really been analyzed yet, because you could do certain things like heat maps to analyze, get percentages, trends, so that's going to be the real power of how you use data and mapping, and, so that's yet to become, but that's going to tell a better story.
Thank you.
And to that point, if I could, just to kind of bounce off Mr. Hicksonball's comments and Ms. Volker's, if there's, and I'm just saying this as a suggestion in case I forget it, but if there's a way that we had access, or whomever has access of kind of like an Excel spreadsheet where you can filter and you can highlight, you know, code violations, hearing, and you can select all of it, and that would map those certain fields that you would, that we have selected, perhaps.
The challenge will be to figure out how to map that in a time period, because again, it also based on the outcome. So again, I would go back to, if I can sort with code enforcement, can we agree to exclude the grass cases from, like, I don't know what point, we can have them assemble the data, assemble to President Hicksonball's point, we can assemble what the categories are, and then we can talk about what to include and what not to include.
Sure.
I also would, to me, I'm more interested in the repeat violations than I am the one-off. So I really don't care that you had a broken window
Right.
and code sent you a letter to fix it. I worry that it happened 4 years in a row
That's-
with different cases. So to Chris's point, I think the heat map and identifying the frequency is probably more important than the individual citations.
Sure, and just how to capture.
Yep.
Yeah, quick question, Ken. In my world, we would use a CRM system. Do we have something like that that the city would use to, where each parcel in the city, data can be entered, and then you can sort that however you want, depending, you know, police might want to sort it one way, city council might want to.
So in our GIS system, there are numerous layers, and we can sort those and catalog those however we want. Any other data we bring in, we have to have the spreadsheet, we have to have the tabulated data to do that, which is why we had to create it with code enforcement and do it the way we did, is because that information didn't readily exist.
Yeah.
So we had to go find it, input it, create it in a table based on addresses that they could then plot based on what is inputted.
So if I'm
But we could do it,
understanding
if you gave me a spreadsheet, or gave, more importantly, I don't do anything. If you gave Marsh that tabulated data, they could definitely do that.
Right. So from what I'm hearing, it just sounds like we're using kind of a spreadsheet raw data. We're not using a program that's designed for, say, a city to keep long-term track of property records and nuisances or code violations or any other thing that the city might want, where you can just pull the parcel and then you've got all the information.
So we do have a separate permit system that you can search on by address. So we have some of that information, but I'm not sure how you would, for example, if you wanted to know where every permit was issued last year, we could pull that information. If you wanted to pull every permit related to a new garage being constructed, we would have to go through multiple layers and figure out, because we don't necessarily have that identified the same way on every property. So having that uniform system is going to be the challenge.
Right. So is there any conversation about that going forward? Because it seems like it might be something worth looking at investing in.
So I think that, I think we can have that discussion moving forward. I don't want to belabor this process for that information. Any other questions? All right. All right, so we've already talked about the information. One of your homework assignments is going to be what information and research do we want collectively to be researched and mapped? And then the next component to talk about is survey questions. So survey questions, I always struggle with this because you want to dig into details that aren't readily apparent, and you want to identify areas. So for example, if I had a goal to reduce crime in the city, that's a no-brainer. Everybody wants that, right? So the question is to dig deeper and to put priorities on things. So the questions that we've outlined here, there's about 50 of them, and I'm going to walk through them, but I'm not looking for answers. I want to give a broad-based picture of the type of input that we're looking for. And what's going to happen is after we go through these questions, we want you to propose modifications to the questions. We want you to propose different questions. We want basically this to be the opportunity, because a lot of the feedback or a lot of the ability to move things forward is going to be based on the information that we ask for and digging down to what priorities are. So that's what the intent is here as part of these survey questions. So the beauty about hiring a consultant is they have a lot of creative tools that they use. And one of those is they've done these survey questionnaires before. And so again, we don't want to go through every survey question and have an open-ended question where somebody says, and this, but for this, and then we have to go through each one and figure out how to compile information. So essentially, the questionnaire that we do will be distributed by an email through SurveyMonkey. That's not what we're doing tonight, but when we ultimately get it out, you'll be responding online, and your basic answers will either be to identifying that item as a low priority, a medium priority, a high priority. You also have the ability to say, nope, it's completed, it's adequately addressed. Essentially, we don't need to spend any more time on this. It's no longer relevant, or I have no opinion of it. So if there's a question on here regarding sewer and somebody doesn't feel like they have enough information to answer that question, they can put no opinion and move on. We're not trying to pigeonhole people and making them feel uncomfortable of responding to things that they don't necessarily feel comfortable responding to. So all of the questionnaire relates to the topics that we just said, and we'll start with sidewalks and trails, but these are the categories that we mentioned earlier. And I apologize, I threw them up here, even though I know it's entirely not readable, but they hand out, what I'd like the council and the planning commission and anybody else attending to do is to pull out those questions, the handout from the back. So it's all stated here, so pull out to page 2, and we'll start talking about sidewalks and trails. So the first question, the Mishawaka Riverwalk is a linear landmark amenity that's part of the uniqueness of Mishawaka. The Riverwalk was developed as a multi-use pathway to be the inner expressway for walkers, joggers, and bike riding. When the 2030 Riverwalk Master Plan was created in 2008, it was a goal to be completed by 2030. With the current cost escalations and project funding, the completion of this plan will likely extend out decades. What priority should the completion of this plan be given, knowing that the future sections will include future property acquisition and bridge crossings that are disproportionately expensive? What you'll find is a lot of these questions are based on priorities and giving weight. So as Kate indicated, a big issue is neighborhoods and rental property, and yet we're trying to do 100 different things at one time, and we can walk and chew gum, and we can do 100 different things at one time, but what we're asking you to dig on in here is related to all these other issues that we're doing. How does the Riverwalk rate? You know what? We can say we've done enough Riverwalk. The Riverwalk is good. Right now, we need to concentrate on neighborhoods and addressing rental housing. This is the type of question that we want you to put in perspective. Basically, we don't have an unlimited checkbook. So we have to determine priorities, and this comprehensive plan is a way to determine those priorities. That's the input that we're looking for.
Ken, can we have a copy of the Riverwalk plan?
Yeah,
I have never seen it.
I know you have, Kate, but I will.
haven't.
Yeah, so.
Well, give
It's
it to
been
me
on
again.
every other PowerPoint presentation that I've done, and the president's nodding his head. So you may not be associated with it, but the plan has been in
All right.
existence.
Oh, I know it's in existence.
Yeah,
I
okay.
just don't know where
Okay.
it is.
All right,
Might be in a pile on my desk.
okay. I'll print out a big one for you so you can
I need the
hang it up. Okay,
Thank you.
sure. Any other questions?
I have a quick one. Who all will be conducting the survey?
So conducting the survey, and I think that's, thank you for bringing it up. The purpose of this survey is not to go to the general public. The purpose of this survey is to go to the elected, appointed, department head type positions who know the city better than anyone else. And the purpose of this, and I'll use the county plan as an example, and I don't mean to disparage any process or plan that people have done, but I use the county plan as an example because one of the things I found in participating is they had a very open process and they asked everyone to participate. So Mishawaka goes and we participate as part of the county plan. And one of the things I noticed is we talked disproportionately about agricultural preservation. Because of what happened out in New Carlisle, there are folks from New Carlisle that are disproportionately interested for very good reason, but they come and they basically take over the process. So if you looked at, and mind you, they haven't presented a draft plan publicly of that plan yet, but what we don't want to have happen is that, let's say certain people are upset with us right now about a certain issue, and we put a plan out there publicly, you get a disproportionate reaction because of that one issue and not a fair representation of everything. So very much like when we do park planning, we prepare a draft of a master plan, and then we present that to public for comment. So it's not that anybody will have the ability to add topics, to evaluate topics, to criticize our work. The whole point of this, though, is to give them something to comment on. I use my mom as an example. My mom, she's 86 years old now, and essentially, if I told her to come up with a plan for the city and what the important issues are, and let's say if I asked my mom regarding, we're going to put a park downtown, would she have ever come up with Buter Park as the concept down there? Or would she have said, it's a park, let's put a playground there? And there's nothing wrong with that. But our point in only dealing with the elected and appointed and the people of knowledge to start with is we feel like we're going to get a better draft to start with. We still want to include, there could be someone that says, I do want a jungle gym in Buter Park, and we should be adding that, and that's a fair comment. But we want to start with the plan at this level and then open it up to public comment, rather than just to open up a broad question that we then have a soup that we have to put together with all the responses put back in. And if people have a problem with that, that's a valid issue, and that's why we're having this meeting. So if you have strong opinions that we should go a different direction, now's the time we want to hear that, because we don't want to mess up the process, if you will, and spend a lot of time and then hear later, well, you should have gone to the public first. It is what it is. So, any questions? Nope. So the second question, the city continues to add walks or pathways as part of planned roadway or infrastructure projects. What priority should the city place on creating walks, pathways outside of planned roadway or infrastructure projects? Specifically, identifying higher need areas either by use, traffic, or known missing links, and prioritize resources away from other projects to complete these improvements. So a good example, when we have projects, we include walks. Chris does a great job of doing that. So I used University Drive as an example. So from where the hotels are on the east side of Grape, as part of the repaving of that project, we built a sidewalk on the south side of the road and then partnered with University Park Mall to bring that sidewalk into the mall to give people the ability to walk there. What we haven't done as of yet, because we don't have a project there, but there's an apartment complex that's located at Indian Ridge that connects to the Walmart. And you can see the walk lines in the grass where people are walking through there. One of the things we tend to do is we wait for another public project to do those sidewalks. What this question is asking is, should we reprioritize those funds and then not just wait for the overall improvement project, but should we spend money on that sidewalk connection using the example of Indian Ridge? So again, you could identify this as a low priority, a medium priority, or a high priority. And the one thing I'll say about the grading system is everybody identifies everything as a high priority. That doesn't work. So, just saying. So essentially, if you do that, you're throwing away your vote. You're throwing away your input because it won't compare to everybody else's. The next one, our city sidewalk system was studied, evaluated for condition and accessibility. There are many existing sidewalks that are in need of repair or improvement. We currently use a 50-50 sidewalk program where each owner is responsible for replacement, with the city paying for half and the city paying for the other half. So the resident pays for half, we pay for half. Should existing areas in need of repair or improvement be provided more resources than are currently being provided? So I use Lincoln Way as a good example. That's a state highway, but ultimately they're not going to replace the sidewalks. Some of those are in horrible condition. Should we reprioritize funds away from other projects? Because again, we don't have an unlimited checkbook. How high of a priority is it to provide those sidewalk connections? To replace sidewalk for both ADA accessibility, for safe routes to school, everything. Like, there's so many good projects out there and only a limited amount of funding. This is what we're looking for your input on.
Ken?
Yes.
Just a real quick question. The 50-50 system, was that always the policy in the city? Do you know? I'm just curious.
Since I came back, that's the one that I'm aware of, yes.
Like,
So for 2 decades, it's been that way at least.
Okay. Yeah, okay, thank you.
And that's not to say when we do a road project, so everything that was just done with sewer separation, We replace all the handicap ramps, we replace the walks, and there is no charge to the homeowner when we do that.
right.
But if you're going to do it independently, for example, my house didn't have a curb in front of it when we moved in. We used the 50/50 program and paid for half the curb to be installed as
So
part
it's
of
been
it.
installed for, like you said, decades, the 50/50 plan?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so next, commercial areas like Grape Road and Main Street have long been accosted for not having adequate sidewalks or bike paths. Although the city has worked to provide connections and improvements, most of the area is still devoid of this type of improvement. The reality is it's disproportionately expensive to provide these amenities in areas that were never designed for the improvement. This is due to the lack of right-of-way, the cost of reconfiguring traffic signals, and sometimes a lack of interest or opposition from owners who do not want the increased responsibilities for maintenance. Should the city provide more resources than are currently being provided, taking away from other worthwhile projects to accelerate improvements in this area? And I don't want to bias the argument here, but this is one of those areas that I feel strongly about. As we're doing projects, I feel it's completely worthwhile to do that. But we have, in my mind, so many other priorities than buying property at the price of potentially millions of dollars and reconfigure traffic signals for people to walk along Grape Road. And when I think of Grape Road, it's a vehicular corridor, so yes, there are workers that take buses, that it's very important that they have safe access. But at the same time, this is not the area that you want to encourage people to walk and interact with the automobile because of how it was designed originally. So these are one of the decisions that we have to make, but this is why we want to dig into it. And keep in mind, when we were asked that question in the future, let's say we choose not to make this a higher priority, we can identify it to anybody that asks that we considered this item and we identified it as not a high priority. Or in the reverse, we did study this, we've identified it as a high priority, and the next logical outcome is here are the projects that we're going to do as a result of that. So this is the input that we're looking for. Next, School City of Mishawaka continues to be a walk-on system without school busing. Although most areas are served are older residential areas with sidewalks, should the city create a separate project to study pedestrian routes to school and then prioritize these improvements, taking away from other worthwhile projects to accelerate improvements in this area? A good example of this is the Carter work build that was done. The city specifically evaluated that area and built sidewalks to make sure that those kids had a safe route to school as part of that project. Do we want to carry that in other areas? Are there other deficiencies? And if so, we'll dig into what they are, but that's the question that we're asking there. And then connections outside Mishawaka. So the Mishawaka Riverwalk is currently connected to the city South Bend, although a circuitous manner. Maycog, Elkhart, St. Joseph County, and the city of Mishawaka are all working together to investigate a connection between Mishawaka and Elkhart. Granger Paths has previously identified a desire to have more connections to the city. What priority should the city place on making more and better connections? Specifically, should we prioritize projects away from other areas to connect to other areas outside the city? So those are the teasers regarding sidewalks and paths. So next we move on to transportation planning. So if you go to page 3. Complete streets is an approach to planning, designing, building, and operating, maintaining streets that enables access and use for all people, including pedestrians, bicyclists, bike rider or bus riders, and motorists of all abilities and ages. Should the city adopt a more stringent standard to provide more resources than are currently being provided, because again, we currently try to address this on a case-by-case basis, to further accelerate improvements in this area? So one of the things that when we talk about bike riders, and Derek is an avid bike rider, so he can bend my ear on occasion, but the issue that we have is if you look at the bike routes, is when you think of neighborhoods, like if I'm going down Mishawaka Avenue, wouldn't it be safer if I went a block north and took Grove Street and be away from the traffic and still be on a public street if I'm riding my bike from here to, let's say, Notre Dame, and I'm going in that route? So it doesn't necessarily, historically, we have not felt the need to put up cones, line lanes, and the like, in part because people have the ability to use that transportation grid. Other areas, there are clear deficiencies, Grape Road and Main Street being one of them, regarding that doesn't allow for bikes and transportation. But these are the types of things that we want you to consider as we move forward.
Ken, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Are you suggesting that that we put signage up that says Grove is the bike route? Or are you saying logically?
I am not. I'm just saying that that's how
Okay, so
people use it.
logically, one would
Logically,
think,
right.
okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah. And we were approached, for example, South Bend, when they reconfigured Jefferson, they had a different section as you get on the other side of Logan. So they had a much wider street. They were putting bike lanes in. They asked us if we wanted to participate, and we didn't have the same section. So there's a curb ramp there, but there's not a bike lane as you continue into the city of Mishawaka. But clearly, we could, if we prioritized it, we could widen the street. We could put a bike lane in and have a more complete street for people that are using bikes as transportation.
Thank you.
Ken, I think you have a question in the back from Mr. Portales.
Yes. We will definitely consider that as we go to redraft them, but I think in terms of a priority, I think any of these things that I've just asked, you could identify as a high priority, low priority, or medium. That's really what we're looking at. Okay. All right, so our roadway system is graded for how well we move traffic efficiently. In very basic terms, the more congestion, the longer it takes to get from one place to another because of traffic volume, the lower the grade. So if you're waiting multiple signals to get through, it might be rated as a D. So Mishawaka and the entire region, we have problems, but we're generally graded reasonably well. And I use the example when I worked outside Philadelphia and then the Twin Cities. It would take me sometimes over an hour to commute from one point to another, and I don't think it's 20 minutes is usually a pretty good feel for get from one part of the community to another. So moving traffic efficiently often requires improvements that result in more traffic using a specific corridor at higher speeds. Should the city conduct a separate study to review the situation with the intent of making traffic through residential areas more difficult? Essentially, I look at roads like Mishawaka Avenue, for example. We get complaints regarding the speed, and we've taken steps to provide bump outs and do other things. Should we take that to the next level? The other good example is what Chris is currently outlined for Vistula in terms of the redesign of Ballard by Twin Branch School, is that there'll now be a stop sign. Before you could travel on Vistula free, and now there'll be a stop sign and a raised crossing in order to better control traffic. So we're slowing down traffic, very specifically addressing it as part of the school crossing. But should we apply that to other areas? It's routinely, and the reason why that question is on there, whether it's Dragoon, Vistula, as you get on the east side of Bittersweet, we continue to get complaints regarding, in fact, we got one today on Filbert. Most of that property is in the county, but still, we're talking about a straight line connection that doesn't have any stop signs or intersections or anything that people feel when they get on it they can fly. Should we look at that and apply a priority to essentially making our travel conditions worse? That's 3. Railroads continue to have a significant impact on the transportation in the city. The city has and will continue to provide improvements as necessary to keep our whistle ban. In the last 30 years, grade separations have been provided on Main Street at the Canadian National, Capitol Avenue at the Norfolk Southern Line, at Ironwood on the Norfolk Southern Line, and the only other grade separation currently envisioned is a partnership between the city and the county at Douglas Road Crossing at the Canadian National Line west of Capitol Avenue. There are also occasional fatalities that occur, usually due to error or recklessness on the part of the driver or pedestrian, or in some cases, the cause has been suicide. Should the city create a separate project to study our interface with the railroads and then prioritize these improvements, again, taking away from other worthwhile projects very specifically to study the railroads? Number 4, public safety makes up over half of our budget and is the most important public service we provide. The city constantly analyzes and addresses individual circumstances as physical developments are proposed. Accidents, speed of traffic, access for fire are all considerations for new development. Should the city create a separate project and to analyze and study existing development issues at the macro or citywide level, not associated with new development? And so I just used the example of Vistula Road and the connection to Twin Branch School. Should we do that? So part of the evolution of this, this is a very general question, but the next question, if this is a high priority, is where are those locations, right? We'll dig down on that if that's a high priority. Public busing is provided by Transpo. One of the comments we got when we announced the comprehensive plan process undergoing was the fact that we have signs located along roadways for bus stops, but we have no sidewalk to get there and we have no place for people to stand. And how that evolved was a change. Transpo is its own taxing entity, and they used to be able to pick up anybody at any location along the route, and they wanted to change that and to identify it as specific locations. So they randomly, and in terms of where they were picking up, identify and place those signs in the public right-of-way. They did it without respect to sidewalks or anything being there, because that's where people were gravitating and flagging the buses. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that's how it's happened. So Transpo is that separate
Ken?
taxing entity?
Ken?
Yeah.
I think Mr. Torti has a question for
Yeah.
you.
Right.
I want to get a feel for what are we shooting for, what type of details are you using this information to create a more broad message? And is there advantage or disadvantage to having it too vague versus too specific?
So I think the beauty of a comprehensive plan is it's general in nature, and then it can dictate specific studies that are separate from the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan document itself would be very general. One of the things I don't like about our current comprehensive plan that we reference is the 2000 plan. We identify it has a land use map that identifies certain areas as residential that now have evolved and have commercial and other characteristics, and we constantly identify, well, things have changed since then. Well, the reality is the minute you put a map into a document like a comprehensive plan, it's going to constantly evolve over time. So how we're approaching it is we want the comprehensive plan to be general, but we want it to roll off specific other analyses or studies to dig into the issues that we deem to be a high priority. So in this case, let's say Transpo is not identified as a high priority. Once we get that feedback, we're not going to spend further time analyzing and including the interrelationship with Transpo as part of our comprehensive plan. It doesn't mean that if Transpo came to us, we wouldn't partner with them and we wouldn't do something. But the reality is we only have so much time and so much checkbook. So the point of this is to evaluate that. But that's what I'm saying. You get the hard job of doing the homework of identifying what is the high priority and what's a medium priority and what's a low priority.
If you put certain things and we rank them from high priority to low priority, you get a better feel than just answering each question individually.
We don't want to rank them like 1 to 100 and have everybody come up with a number. So literally, it could be that we have 50 responses and we have 50 people, of the 50 people who responded, 45 identify them as a high priority, 1 identifies them as a low priority, but you will get a range and you will get a spread as a result of these questions. So, and then when we return the feedback, then I think that would be the appropriate time to comment or dig down more. Because where do you draw the threshold then of how many items do you include and how many you don't include, right? So, right. That's it. That they were drafted very specifically for that reason. We want your job to be hard. I hate to say that, but we do. Good.
If I can piggyback on that, and I agree with Chris's point, but I can see the method in the thought that went into the question. At times, though, and I don't have a specific example to give you, but it seems to me that on 1 or 2 of these, I feel like I don't have enough information to even prioritize. So what would it do to the outcome to have another category, which is additional information required?
So part of your review of these questions and your homework is I want you to flag the ones that you have a problem with, and so we
Okay.
can either better word the question or come up with a different system for how to address it.
Okay, great.
And that goes to Mike's point as well regarding that it's a yes or no question. I mean, if we need to redraft them, we'll redraft them.
Okay, fantastic.
Any other?
Ken, yeah, before I forget, like Matt says, you speak about this old comprehensive plan, that things you don't like. As a new person, is there any way I'd like to read that?
So all three plans that we referenced are online. If you go to the
They're all
planning
online?
section, they're all online.
Thank you very much.
Yep. And if you want a paper copy, you better hurry, because I think this is the last one we have in our
I'll take it. I would like to claim it. I'd like to claim it right now,
Yeah,
so,
okay.
yeah.
Sorry, historical purposes, it's saved.
What's that?
All right. And again, I don't want to, I want to answer all questions,
Yeah,
but we have a whole lot of questions to plow through. And all this is great input, so we really appreciate your time this evening. So again, public safety, we've already talked about. Public busing, we just talked about. Let's move on to annexation and growth. So in the last quarter of century, the city has not attempted to undertake an involuntary annexation. Most annexations occur when property wishes to be developed or change and needs city services. This is in part based on existing annexation law, which makes it difficult or impossible to annex property without the consent of the property owner. Should the city evaluate our existing borders and seek to proactively annex property to make our city boundary more uniform, with the goal of reducing the number of jagged borders and islands that have been created over time? Again, I think it's a straightforward question. Number two, the city's policy has been to require annexation at the time of development if the proposed development is going to utilize city water and sewer utilities. There have been instances where annexation has not been possible because of the lack of contiguity. We've allowed the developer to extend utilities at their expense and develop in the county. Given that this is a potential obstacle to future city growth, an incentive to find land on some level and to find land in the county to pay lower taxes, should it be a high priority that the city have a policy not to extend sewer to areas for new development, and I stress new development, without annexation? And Fern Cleveland is a good example here. The dental office located on the northwest corner of that intersection is in the county. It was extended city services because we didn't have contiguity for annexation, and now will likely perpetually be an obstacle to our growth. And should we change that policy and just place that burden on the person looking to develop property, that in order to get city water and sewer, you got to figure out a way to get into the city? That is the question that we want to ask. And then it gets harder, because the next question is, sometimes existing businesses in the unincorporated St. Joseph County area require water or sewer extensions to continue it to exist and grow. So right now, AM General is a good example of, it's got city water and sewer, it's located in the county. So should we have a separate policy made that allows for the limited extension of sewer to serve existing developments in the county? And Leidig just undertook this. So Leidig just paid for a long sewer extension going down Dragoon Trail because they had been on a septic and well system. And so they needed the sewer, and they extended it down at their cost, but they're in the county. So again, go ahead, Kate.
So just to clarify this, is this question asking if the city adopts a policy to pay for
No.
the extension? Okay.
No, the question is, do we provide that, give them the ability to provide for that connection?
If they're willing to pay for it.
If they're willing to pay for it,
Okay.
right? Even though that, again, could be a further obstacle to our growth in the future if we allow it to be extended and don't require annexation.
Ken, on some of these, there may be a difference in what might be a good idea in principle versus practical with things that are in the pipeline that we may not be aware of.
Right.
If there's anything like that, like, hey, there's a deal that's on the table right now that if we adopted a policy would be a problem, that would change my opinion on it.
Okay.
So are we going to get that information as part of these?
As a general rule, and I think one of the reasons why people like working with the city of Mishawaka is we don't throw people, we're very upfront with them regarding any policy changes, and we would make the council aware of any issues that are pending prior to the adoption of something.
Perfect, thank you.
Of course.
That's, we can extend water, we can extend wastewater, or sewer, I'm sorry. But electric really is all right for our work. At this time, ordinance law, it precludes us from extending our utility. That's unfortunate. Happened in 2015, where it seems to early that through state legislative process, but as you think of extension of
I just need to clarify that. I'm sorry, were you pointing to me? Are you saying that if they're not annexed into the city, you can't extend electricity? Or are you saying that even if they're annexed into the city, you can't extend?
Yeah, if they're annexed, like, if they're annexed and the property's not within our utility boundary
Okay, so the utility boundary is the issue. Okay,
for
No,
electric.
yeah.
Right,
just-
okay.
So for electric, our current boundary is locked, so current areas that are in the city are, we have multiple, so some are served already by AEP. The Mayor's Neighborhood is one of them. The new apartment complex off of Beacon Parkway, part of it is located in our service area, and part of it's an AEP service area.
I understand.
And neither one of us want to give up on that, but that's an area outside the comprehensive plan that
Okay.
we're not looking to address our electric boundary as part of that.
Thank you.
That's a good point Mr. Lynch brought up for information. So St. Joseph County routinely reaches out to the city to consult on developments proposed outside but close to the city limits. I will occasionally write emails regarding, we had a situation where they were looking to do a residential development off of Bittersweet, and it was in our service area for sewer, even though we're nowhere near that area. So I asked the county very specifically what their intent was, because we didn't want to have, obviously it makes a difference long-term of how big our sewer needs to be to service that area, if they're going to approve development in that area, and I believe ultimately that subdivision was turned down or continued. But that's the type of issue. Do we want to become more involved at the county level is the question that we're asking. The next question, number 5, is should the city require that developers leverage or use developer funds to incentivize annexation to be used to bring in other properties, not just the one being proposed for development? So in the example that I used at the corner of Cleveland and Fur, should we have required them to talk to the neighbor and get that property? That's what we're asking at that time. So this is a separate but similar question to should we have a policy, because it'll go hand in hand with each other. Next, moving on to environmental and sustainability. Thank you. You've got good eyes, Becky.
What?
You've got good eyes. Don't you have a hand on? Yeah, okay. All right. Anyway, so environmental sustainability. Our single greatest environmental resource is the St. Joseph River. The city's made massive strides to protect and improve this asset through our wastewater improvements, stormwater improvements, Riverwalk acquisition, and park improvements. Should the city prioritize more investments to protect and improve this resource, again, taking away from other worthwhile projects to accelerate improvements? Number 2, the city is blessed to have a number of spaces that are adjacent or in the city that provide a natural woodland, open, undeveloped areas that provide nature opportunities and habitat for wildlife close or within the city. Examples include the Res, the Convent property, Blair Hills, the combination of Blair Hills, Audubon, and the Dodge landfill, Walter Stickler Park. These types of larger preservation park amenities are usually provided by the state or county. Should the city develop plans to provide for long-term protection or expansion of high-quality nature areas close to the city? Number 3, we live in an area that's not directly impacted by climate change as other areas of the country. One of the areas that's changing is the frequency, or that storms are getting more intense and can linger in areas that push the limits of our stormwater management system, both private and public. Should the city conduct a study and develop plans to increase standards and provide greater proactive property protection, particularly in areas of known deficiencies? So we had a storm last year, for example, on North Main Street. It was sunny in Blair Hills. They had the rain there. It stayed for a period of time, and there was flooding associated with that. There are many areas in private development of commercial areas that were done with dry wells that we only used to require, I want to say, roughly 1/6 of what we currently require in terms of stormwater retention. Nylon Craft, which has since changed ownership, but when I worked at DLZ, we literally designed that property because of the lack of room, that the loading dock would flood in times that that system would go over that 1-inch requirement. So they're essentially, we use the loading dock as a stormwater retention area. Again, is this an area that we want to spend more time and resources to address, or is our current situation good and it's a low priority? 4, in the last few decades, the federal government has drastically increased the standards associated with providing safe public drinking water. Mishawaka's water routinely well exceeds the even increased standards. But that being said, we're now pushing the limits as the standards for lead, copper, and PFAS continue to be increased without any significant funding being provided. Essentially, we're getting hit by more unfunded mandates. We know that utility rates will continue to go up to address these standards, and we're a community that has older infrastructure, including lead pipes and fittings that have been in the ground for over 100 years. We've been working to replace our public infrastructure. I appreciate Mayor Wood's direction and his plan that go with the long-term control plan and the separation. And our position's been to continue to coordinate this by objecting to the more unfunded mandates that could require the city to replace older pipes inside private homes and property. So if you can imagine, the government is looking for us to not only fix the public side of the valve that connects to your house, but they want us to go into houses and actually replace the lead piping inside the houses as part of that. It's a challenge. So the question here, and obviously getting rid of lead pipes is a priority. We continue to do it, but the question is, should the city evaluate requiring these types of improvements to other unrelated property improvements in older areas that ultimately increase the cost of development? So going back to the idea that we have a limited checkbook, developers have a limited checkbook too. So if we have an older area of the city and we're converting a business, for example, do we put that burden on that conversion and we increase the cost of development so that the city does not have to undertake that cost at a future point in time? Should we leverage our ability to require developers to do improvements? I use the example, we have a property that used to be a bar eons ago, and they want to now convert it into a restaurant. They then have to provide ADA connections, they have to provide separate fire suppression for it. Do we also then require them to go through the property and fix the lead pipes, or are then we going to put it at a threshold that makes development in older areas just not worth it? And I use the example of our federal our federal CDBG funds. We stopped doing home renovations as part of that because of the federal standards associated with lead paint. We could be doing a $10,000 improvement and have to do $30,000 in lead paint abatement. And so from a functional standpoint, that just wasn't possible moving forward to be efficient with those funds. So we made the decision not to do home rehabs anymore. These are the types of questions that we think are appropriate relative to the changing environment that we're dealing with. The other thing, the very last question, the times have changed significantly since the mid-1960s when the city's zoning ordinance was last comprehensively addressed. To date, there has not been a need to make wholesale amendments based on technology changes. So we've currently dealt with things like small cell towers, EV charging stations, solar panels. All we believe are currently regulated by our existing codes and ordinances, and we have no problems from a zoning perspective. Should the city take a more proactive approach to being more sustainable by taking a more proactive, sensitive, unique to Mishawaka constraints? And the examples I use are, my wife gets on me because the grass starts getting longer in the spring and the bees need the pollen. So they encourage you not to mow in May. Now it's April because it's warmer. But essentially, and I continue to mow because that's just who I am. Anyway, that's an environmental program that people are pushing. But our code limits the height of the grass. Should we have a provision that would allow for the extension? And we have the same questions being asked. We've been asked about chickens. We've been, I know South Bend when I talked to Gary Gillot, this was like 10 years ago, South Bend actually did a study to identify where they were deficient in street trees so they could actually maximize the number of street trees that they're planting. Are these elements that we should consider moving forward, or is it a low priority and we don't move forward? Moving on to the next series of questions. Housing in neighborhoods, the diversity of housing options. The city's blessed to have a diversity of housing options in the city. We continue to have a higher proportion of multifamily residential growth. This is also consistent with national trends where there's now a greater demand for rental properties for those with higher incomes. Multifamily complexes have a higher tax rate than owner-occupied homesteaded property, and typically a lower public service demand because of private roads, utilities, and leaf collection. Should the city encourage more housing more of this rental type of large growth rental housing to meet both the demand for housing and provide for the cost-effective delivery of services. Number two, many communities, including adjacent communities, have made an effort to change codes to allow existing homes to be modified for more housing unit opportunities. This includes changes like allowing accessory buildings to be converted into dwellings, permitting duplexes by right, and reducing parking requirements. Our city, Mishawaka, has specifically gone the opposite direction in our older neighborhoods. We want to promote density, but not at the potential detriment of existing single-family neighborhoods. Knowing that housing availability is an issue, should the city prioritize resources away from other projects to do more to change older workforce housing, specifically where many decades ago, homes were carved up into rental apartments, back to single-family, thus reducing the number of housing units in older neighborhoods? Just smiles, I like it.
High priority.
High priority, all right. Homeowner workforce housing needs to continue to be a major issue for all communities across the country. The median home listing price in Mishawaka is close to $200,000. At the time that I wrote the question, there were only 4 homes listed that were $100,000 or lower, and each one was yellow tagged or uninhabitable as part of that listing. To currently afford a $200,000 home, it's estimated that you need to make $70,000 a year. Median household income in 2022 was $51,500. The time this was written, Mishawaka also had less home ownership availability per capita than both South Bend and Elkhart. So when I did the listing, if you will, South Bend had over 200 homes listed. Elkhart had over 90 homes listed. We had about 60 homes listed. Again, looking at our population, we have less homes listed or available than either of those two communities. So, Mishawaka continues to partner with Habitat for Humanity of St. Joseph County to provide affordable home ownership opportunities. Even with our current efforts, which are significant, this results in about 10 additional homes per year in the city. Should we prioritize resources away from other projects to create even more of this type of housing opportunities? Again, it goes back to the limited wallet and where we want to spend our money. Number 4, Mishawaka Housing Authority partnerships. The city has partnered with Mishawaka Housing Authority to develop and operate multiple low-income apartment projects in the city, including Patel Apartments, Mary Phillips Apartments, and the Main Junior High Apartments. There is not as many federal dollars available as there used to be to provide this type of development. Should the city prioritize resources away from other projects to create more of these types of housing opportunities? And the other thing I'll note is if you look at the map that we presented earlier with the GIS system, there were no issues with the housing authority properties. So when you look at Barbie Creek, when you look at the apartments that I mentioned, there were no issues in terms of the management, and that's another consideration that, again, it's hard to put in questions, but is a reality. And lastly, on the housing in neighborhoods, rental housing, single family, Mishawaka has a large amount of legacy worker housing associated with the industries that used to be located in the core of the city. The city is interested in creating additional regulations and restrictions to ensure that properties are appropriately maintained and to minimize the potential for nuisance properties. Should the city prioritize resources away from other projects to reduce the number of rental homes in older neighborhoods?
Ken, quick question.
Yeah.
I didn't see a question on here that had to do with just development of single-family neighborhoods that were, just normal market rate type. Is that something that we're not considering at all as part of the plan, or just letting it happen as the market dictates, or what?
So I think we can definitely add that question, and Crystal will have that drafted, but if you also want to include that on your list. We've always approached that as market-driven.
Yep.
So when we've been asked by developers, we'll consider an investment, very much like I indicated for TIF. It's very hard to generate any funding to put it in, and the only other way to do is to divert it from other projects that we're doing than to put it into single family. So that's definitely, we can definitely have that as a question and see if that gains support.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? All right, so moving on to the aesthetic gateways and sense of place improvements, page 7. The city has spent considerable funds to improve the appearance of road corridors in the city as part of other infrastructure improvements. Other corridors that are not scheduled or planned for other improvements have been historically not prioritized for streetscape improvements, like ornamental lighting and street trees. And this is, Woody, I put this in here specifically for you. I didn't identify it, but I put it in here for you because you mentioned Lincoln Way coming east from Ironwood as a prime example of something that you'd like to see. So should the city prioritize resources away from other projects to create these better gateway aesthetics on more heavily traveled roads not scheduled for other improvements? So in that area, obviously it's a state highway, we're not planning improvements in there. Should we prioritize that? That's the question.
We should also prioritize Milburn Boulevard as the gateway into the city.
I'm sorry?
We should also
Milburn.
prioritize Milburn Boulevard as the gateway into our city, along with,
We've already done a whole lot of planting and put that median in there, so
yeah, but
We
the
can
median's
talk-
not being taken care of, so that's another story. But
yeah, that's another issue we'll
I
talk
mean,
about.
looking at the gateway on the north and the gateway on the south, there's a big difference between the one on Milburn Boulevard.
Okay.
So that needs, in my mind, that's a priority that needs to be addressed if we're attracting people and businesses into the area.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. The next question, there are numerous locations at the entrance points of the city where there's less than favorable appearance based on the historic or current use of the property. This could be an older used car lot or where a property was developed prior to current developmental standards devoid of landscaping. Should the city prioritize resources away from other projects to create better gateway aesthetic improvements by acquiring property to create gateway improvements that would include a welcome to Mishawaka signage? And so the example that goes through my head is that corner of Dragoon Trail in Ironwood that has the fence around it and the U-Haul. That's a pretty horrible looking corner. Again, I'm not saying that it doesn't meet code, I'm just saying that that's the type of property that I was thinking about when I wrote the question. Next question is, art continues to be a qualitative element that's a measuring stick for vibrant and attractive communities. The city will continue to seek out more opportunities for public art as time goes on. The question is, should the city seek to partner with private property owners to install public art or murals throughout the city? And the examples I have there is for the Indiana Bicentennial, the bison was used. In St. Paul, when we lived there, they used Peanuts characters because it was the home of Charles Schultz to go. I don't know if we want cavemen everywhere, or maybe we do, Mr. President, I don't know.
Some of us do.
But I'm just saying that there are potentially opportunities to have public and private partnerships for that type of element, should that be a high priority of the city. And the other one I'll use as an example is we received a complaint regarding the mural that was painted on the building at the intersection of Jefferson and Logan, the comic book store that was there. And we drove by it the other day, and that's the reason I mentioned it here, is we drove by it, and my wife commented, well, what a great opportunity to fix up that blank wall, because she loved the mural much more than and not to comment on somebody's like or dislike of art. I'm just saying that that did change. You can comment whether it was for the better or for worse, but that definitively changed the appearance, and is that something we want to encourage? That's something to consider. Grape Road and other commercial areas of the city currently feel dated with extensive parking areas, overhead utilities, and the lack of landscaping or ornamental lighting. Given that this area is an important part of our identity as a city, should the city prioritize resources away from other projects to study and install unique aesthetic improvements to enhance this image for older areas? And then lastly, there are two primary expressway access points to the city from outside the region. One's at the Indiana Toll Road, exit 83, and the other's at the 20 bypass at Bremen Highway. Should the city prioritize resources away from other projects to pursue installing landscaping, lighting, and signage in these gateway areas of the city? Moving on to the next question, the economic development. The city has had very little industrial growth in the last few decades, in part because of the changing global economy and the limited availability, high cost of land in the city. Should the city prioritize resources away to create a more traditional industrial development opportunity? Number two, based on our location in the center of the media market, Mishawaka continues to serve as a key location for retail and service businesses looking to serve the larger region. In the past, as legacy industry went out of existence, negatively impacting the city's tax base, including the school city of Mishawaka. Given the radical changes that have occurred with e-commerce, should the city consider providing incentives for the potential reimagination of older retail spaces to better diversify the economy? So the example I'll throw out there, not that I've had any discussions of it, but it still bugs me that Sears, the former Sears in the mall, is empty, and I realize there's an ownership issue and there's extenuating factors going back and forth there, but wouldn't that be a prime opportunity? I know at the Mall of America, for example, they have hotels and I believe residential connected into the mall as part of the amenity, and to expand the amenity beyond just the typical retail. Wouldn't that be a prime opportunity for the University Mall to do, and should we encourage that as part of whatever plan we come up with? That's what we're asking. Number 3, projects like the mill in Grandview receive significant subsidies from the city, and in some cases the state, to build additional density and to fight the brain drain of having our college-educated and professional workforce leave the state. Both of these projects have parking garages, which greatly adds to the potential for assessed valuation and maximizes the use of city infrastructure. Should the city modify codes and publicly advertise incentives to maximize the development potential of both new and existing properties? And I use Firehouse Subs as an example. Is when we met with Chase Properties, we specifically encouraged them. We hear, like, you have a parking lot here that has a lot of room that isn't parked, that you have the ability to do, and then so they created an outlot there to create that development. What else can we do as a city to encourage that, what I would call it, more infill, to build greater density where we already have existing utilities to better serve the city, essentially? And then 4, over the past 15 years, the city has undertaken many quality of life projects. It's one of the mayor's and the council's legacies, investing in parks and neighborhoods. This investment is planned to continue, but now at a slower pace based on available funding. Should the city prioritize resources away from other projects to continue to pursue making greater investments in quality of life improvements? Hard question, isn't it? And then our last section is downtown Mishawaka. So our historic downtown has been transformed into a destination based on a combination of both public and private investments. Should the city study the benefits of restricting future uses to exclude ones that are less beneficial to attracting people from the region? And I use this not in judgment, but I look at the smoke and vape shop and the head shop downtown, that serves an important need for the people that access that, but it doesn't bring people from outside the region. It doesn't add to the vibrancy that we were seeking to do when we attract that. Should we look at modifications to our ordinance that better define what we want to have in our downtown? That's what the question is asking. Next question. The city is currently working with the Mishawaka Business Association and Inspire Mishawaka to develop a grant program to help revitalize downtown businesses. The details are yet to be worked out, but will likely include facade improvements and improvements associated with occupying upper floors or converting space into restaurants or other destination-type businesses that contribute to the vitality of the downtown. Now the question is, should the city prioritize resources away from other projects and partner with property owners to improve solely the historic downtown buildings in the city? So the example I'll use is the Phoenix Building. So the Phoenix Building has the restaurant, the bar down below, but my understanding is they use the upper floors for some storage, but not much else. It would likely take, I'm throwing out a number here, of $1 million to replace the windows, provide the access, provide the fire suppression, everything. Should that be a priority because it's a historic building? Now, the next question is, should we do the same improvement but do it regardless of the historic status of the structure? So barring any other deal that we have with the city, I use the former police station as an example. We required as part of our development agreement that they create a restaurant space in that area. That is a newer building. So let's say that newer building, should we just allocate resources to historic buildings, or should any building qualify for that? That's a question that we want to answer. I use, let's say the Mishawaka, the Mutual, the now Northwest, I believe, bank downtown. Let's say that wanted to be converted into a restaurant, and they were going to get rid of the drive-throughs and create that destination business on that property. That's a newer building that has no historic significance whatsoever. Should we allocate funds in the same manner that we would for the Phoenix, that we would for that property? That's the question that we're asking. And number 4, the 1999 Mishawaka River Center Master Plan was created specifically to address the redevelopment of the former Unirural properties and provide for connections to the remaining historic downtown, including the 100 Center. Should the city expand that plan to include a much larger area that includes Mishawaka Avenue, where we've had some significant development, including the Central Park area, and also better connect to the surrounding residential areas, including the West End. So. And your eyes are starting to glaze over, and thankfully, we are at a conclusion. So the last slide is your homework slide. So we will send you the Word file, we'll send you the PowerPoint presentation from tonight electronically. So you have that information. We can also send you the PDFs of the full maps, so if you want to zoom in on an area, you can zoom in on the area. Again, that's only one select piece of information, but what we're looking for specifically, and we'd like it by May 31st if we can get it, is what other information do you want to see mapped? What questions would you like to see changed, which we've talked about a number this evening, and what other questions would you like to ask the group as a whole? For example, the new single-family housing is a good question. What other questions do you have that you'd like everybody to weigh in on as we formulate a plan moving forward?
Just to clarify something,
Yeah.
you do not want us to answer the survey at this time.
We do not want you to answer the survey. The survey will be done online. You'll be sent
Okay.
an electronic link that you click on that you will then go through the questions once they're created.
So one thing I would wonder about is with the questions, would there be an opportunity for a comment with the survey?
So
When the
right-
survey
so
goes
right-
out, when
so
the
right-
survey goes out?
So right now, as part of your homework, we are very specifically looking for the comment. So you don't have to
Right.
work out the question. You don't have to work out how something's modified. You can just put a red flag on it and say, this is the issue I have with that question. And then
Right.
and then we'll try to figure it out. from
I
there.
understand that
Okay.
part, but what I'm asking is that when this is finalized and it goes out, will there be opportunity for people who are answering
If
this
there
survey to
are,
comment?
it's going to be very limited. Because again, we have to be able to, there might be a catch-all at the end, anything else you want to add. But other than that, we don't want to have 50 or 100 questions and then have individual answers out. Again, this is to do a weighted performance, so we're not looking for, this is a very high-level review.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Prince at this point?
All right. So
Thank
Chris,
you.
is there anything else you want to add from Avmarsh?
Kind of go back to the introductory topic, and I know Ken touched on this, and you may be aware, but when you're looking at these topics and questions, sometimes it's easy to get caught up and think that this is a mandate. You know, really, it's a policy, because when you write good policy statements, what comes out of that is zoning code changes, annexation policies, and things like that. So just remember, don't get caught up as looking at these as mandates. They're guiding principles. That's it.
And I couldn't, if anybody knows me, I can't leave a meeting without making a comment, so. Thank you all for your attention. It was a little hard. I hope you all got chocolate so you can make through. But I wanted to say specifically about the survey, this will be the first of many opportunities, not only for you to participate and help us come up with priorities, but then the public will be engaged at a later date. I've spent 20-plus years doing public engagement, and I'm very enthusiastic. I'm very passionate about it. But what I've also learned is that people need something to respond to or react to. If you give somebody a blank page, if you've ever had to write something, you know, sometimes a prompt can be all the difference. You can sit there and look at that blank page forever and not come up with any great ideas. But if you have something to respond to, you may respond directly to that, but then you also may add a few things in that you didn't even know about until you started thinking about it. So that said, once we get the prioritization put together, then we'll start diving in a little bit more and bringing that information back to you to say, okay, it seemed like new residential subdivisions were as a high priority for the majority of you. Here's some things we can look at to try to actually do that. But the whole idea of this first round is to get us going in the right direction, so I don't go off doing something that doesn't make any sense to you all as leaders of Mishawaka. It's so that we can kind of organize ourselves and push in the right direction. But there's lots and lots of feedback that's going to happen, both with elected officials, our appointed officials, and then ultimately with the public.
Thank you.
Just one quick question. I'm not sure if I know the time frame for this.
We have none.
Okay.
The only one is May 31st.
We want to work diligently, correct. So we're going to take this piece at a time. So if we get questions, for example, and we have additional research we have to do, we don't know what we're going to get, so we don't know how long the research is going to take.
This sounds a lot to me, Mr. Prince, like you're giving us a homework assignment with a deadline, but no deadlines for yourself. So that feels hardly fair, but I
As
understand.
normal, you
Yeah,
have
I got
astute
it.
observations, Mr. President. Yeah.
Mike's got a question.
Thank you, Kate.
So in terms of the questions and responses, I would love an email. If somebody doesn't want to do that and wants to take the time to write it, I will transcribe it. So you're welcome to do it, but otherwise it would just be in email form.
All right, anything else for Mr. Prince or any of our other presenters?
Thank you.
Great start.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Job well done by everyone. We look forward to the process moving forward. And if there's nothing else, then we will conclude tonight's proceedings. Thank you. Is that? It's going to be a big.